We can't hear you.
Okay, we're good now? Okay, awesome. Okay, great. Baruch Hashem. I am very happy. Big zechus to give shir. I wish it was Megillah, but there's really not much more that I could do. So we're gonna need various introductions throughout tonight's shir. So we're gonna start with one, and then I'll go a certain amount of lines, and then I'll ask if there are anything that needs to be clarified. But in order to really understand it, we have to be able to cover a certain amount of ground at a time. So today, and I'm not sure where you're up to, but are we starting from the two dots by Nitma Tumas Hatahim on that's where we're up to?
Yeah,
okay, right. Good. Okay, so Pei Amid Beis, towards the bottom, two dots, Nitma Tumas Hatahim. So just have a little bit of a background. I'm sure many of you are very familiar, but we'll talk as if we're not. Tumas Hatahim is the idea that there's Tumah that is hidden. A person walks over Tumah that he didn't see. The unique thing about Tumas Hatahim is that it has to be that nobody knows that it was there, as we'll see later on in the Gemara. That nobody knows that there was Tumah around, and we'll see how that plays itself out in today's Gemara. But in order to really get into it, let's just go back to the Mishnah just for a moment and look at there are three scenarios that the Mishnah, just a few lines before it discusses. Let's just talk it out. It says HaPesach shenizrak damai, that if you have a carbon Pesach that the zrika was done, and then v'achar kach noida shehu tamei, then you found out that the Pesach was tamei hatzitz miratza. So the tzitz has the ability to be miratza if it became tamei. Again, whether the dam became tamei, whatever it is, but the tzitz has the ability to be miratza on that type of tumah. But nitma haguf, if the person became tamei, ein hatzitz miratza. The tzitz does not help for tumas gufay. When it comes to a nazir and someone who's bring the carbon pesach, the tzitz helps for if the dam became tamei, the ena tzitz miratza al tumas haguf, but it does not help if the person became tamei. Now again, there nazir and someone who's bringing a carbon pesach, both of them. It's this halacha is nogea to that if they are tamei, the person himself is tamei, it's a problem. The reason why, because carbon pesach, as we've seen a number of times, is that it must be eaten. A carbon pesach must be eaten, and if he's tamei and he doesn't have the ability to eat it, you're finished. It doesn't work. So it doesn't make a difference that there's a tzitz that is around to help. If you cannot eat it, then then the Pesach itself is invalid. Also, by Nazir, we find that if a person is Tamei Meis, he is Seiser his Nazirus. So let's say he was counting X amount of days. He had his Nazirus, Stam Nazirus is 30 days. And on day 20, he became Tamei Meis. So he has to restart that clock and begin again. But these are the only two karbanes that it's nogeya, the idea of tumas gufay. So that's why the Mishnah specifically talks about a nazir and someone bringing a Pesach. But in this case, the tzitz does not help. The final case of the Mishnah is what we're going to be discussing today. The final case of the Mishnah is the case of tumas hatahim. The Mishnah says, nitma tumas hatahim hatzitz meratza. If a person became tamei through Tumas hatahim, again, like we said, it's hidden tumah, and we'll see there are many manifestations of hidden tumah. But here, the classic case is he was walking. There was a pile or whatever it is, and then afterwards it was excavated. There was found to be tumah there. So in that case, if he is tamei, the tzitz would help to make it the carbon be in misratzah. So this is a kula of tumas hatahim. So the Gemara is going to go through a bunch of scenarios to try to figure out where do we find this kula of Tumas Hatahim. So let's start the Gemara by Rami Bar Chama. So Rami Bar Chama is going to be talking about a case. So up until now, we have assumed that the person in question that is becoming Tameh are the Bailim, the person who is bringing the carbon. But Rami Bar Chama is going to ask a question: what if the Kayin himself was the one who became Tameh? Does that affect the carbon? And if it would affect the carbon, does the tzitz make it that the Kayin that the carbon is still good? So frek the Gemara by Rami Bar Chama. Kayin hameratze b'karbonai sehen. So when a Kayin is bringing carbon, hutra loy tumas hatahim oilai. Do we say this kula of tumas hatahim? Does the tzitz help by tumas hatahim for the Kayin who became tamei or not? Mi amrinon, do we say ki gemiri tumas hatahim bibailim? When do we learn about the kula of tumas hatahim that the tzitz is misratza? For the tumas hatahim, that's only by the bailim if the owner of the carbon became tamei. But b'kayhin loy gemiri, we do not extend that kula to the kayhin. So if the kayhin was tamei, game over. We have to restart again. Oy dilma, or do we say bizvicha gemiri? We're talking about the carbon, everything that's involved in the carbon. Loishna b'kayhin, the loishna b'bailim, it doesn't make a difference. So Rami Bar Chama's kasha is, now that I know there's such a kula of tumas hatahim, that the tzitz would go and say that this carbon is fine, even if he became tamei through tumas hatahim, does that only work for the bailim, or does that work for the kayhin as well? So we are going to quote a line that today's daf is going to end with. The last words of today's daf are going to be these words. Amar Rava, Tashma. So now again, we're trying to answer the kasha of, can the tzitz be miratza for the tumas hatahom for the kohen being tamei? Okay, is that clear? Any questions? Anything? Great. I've been trying to figure out how to mute my class, but we'll figure it out. Maybe it'll work in share itself. So Tashma, the Tani Reb Chia taught Lo amru tumas hatahim el lemeis bilvad. So we're going to try to examine this statement of Rabbi Chia. He says the din of tumas hatahim, meaning the heter, the kula of tumas hatahim, was only said by mace. Okay, so that is a loaded statement. So what does that mean? Mace lima'ute mai. Meaning it's gonna be mizratza for tuma that he became tummy through tumas mace, but that is excluding something. So what is that coming to exclude? Lav limuute tumas hatahim, the sheretz. Isn't that including if someone became tummy through tumas hatahim of a sheretz? So you had a dead sheretz underneath some rubble. So maybe we're saying again Reb Chia's statement that the tahim is only miratze for tumas mace, but if it was a tuma of sheretz, the tzitz would not be miratze. Maybe it's talking about, and maybe it's coming to be memayet sheretz. Now we're going to have three cases really that we're going to be talking about. So this is one of the cases that tumas sheretz, the tumas hatahim, it will not help. Ubemaya skinon. So now the Gemara wants to be talking about what is this case of tumas sheretz that the tzitz will not help out. Inema b'bailim. If you're going to be talking about it's a case of bailim, meaning we're talking about where the owner became tamei. So it's a very geshmak alamda. So the Gemara says like this. Uviman. So what's that case? Again, the owner is tamei, and that the tumas sheretz will not be miratza. It means still going to be a problem. Ibn Nazir, if you're talking about it's a case of Nazir, again, we have two cases we're talking about, either Nazir or Pesach. So Ibn Nazir, if we're talking about Mi Mahani Bey, does tumas sheretz affect the Nazir? The pasuk says, Ki yamus meis olav amarachmana. The only tuma that affects a Nazir is a tumas meis, and not a tumas sheretz. So you can't tell me that the tumas tahim that's a problem is tumas sheretz if you're dealing with Nazir. Because when it comes to Nazir, sheretz is not even in the equation. So that it can't be nazir. Ela b'oisa Pesach. So rather, we're going to be talking about a case where a person's bringing a carbon Pesach, and the Baal became Tameh, Tumas HaTaim, through a sheretz. And the chiddush of Reb Chia is that the tzitz won't help. So Hanicha Lamanda Amar, it's good according to the one who says, Ein Shoich Din V'Zarkin Al Tmei Sheretz. There's a machlokes. One of the Manda Amrim, they say that if a person is Tamei Sheretz, and you cannot shecht or go through with your carbon Pesach. So that would be good. I mean, if we held like that Manda Amar, so it fits. Meaning Reb Chia said that Tumas HaTahom is only works by Tumas Mace. That excludes, what case are we excluding? The case we're excluding is Tumas Sheretz, that the Baal became Tameh, Tumas Sheretz of Tahom, by a carbon Pesach. That's according to the Manda Amar that Tumas Sheretz would affect a carbon Pesach. El Manda Amar Sheichtin V'Zarkin Al Tmei Sheretz. But there's another Manda Amar that says Sheretz does not affect a carbon Pesach. So if it doesn't affect the carbon Pesach, Hashta Tuma Yedua Hutralai, if a Baal became Tameh through touching, he's holding a dead rat, he's holding a dead sheretz, and yet it doesn't affect the carbon Pesach, Tumas HaTahim Kol Shekain. So if he's on the Tumas HaTahim of a sheretz, of course it's not going to affect the carbon Pesach. So let's just take a step back for a second on what we have over here. We're trying to figure out what is the din if a kohen is tameh. If a kohen is tameh, and with Tumas HaTahim, will the tzitz help him out? Okay, so again, that's the question, Rami Bar Chama. Will the tzitz help out a kohen who is tameh doing the carbon Pesach? That's a question. So the way that we're trying to get here is we're crossing off all of the other possibilities. Reb Chia says a statement that Tumas HaTahim, the kula, where the tzitz helps out, is only by tamei mace. That's only by tamei mace. Okay, so what's the case that it doesn't help out? We tried by saying nazir. It doesn't. That doesn't even start because there's no problem of sheretz by nazir. We started going by carbon Pesach. So we said, yes, there's one shita, one Manda Amar that says that sheretz would affect it. So according to that Manda Amar, we have Reb Chia is excluding the Baal that became Tameh by Tumas HaTahom of sheretz. So we'll put that aside for a minute. But according to the Manda Amar that says that the sheretz won't affect the Baal who became Tameh for a carbon Pesach. So what is Reb Chia excluding? What is Reb Chia coming to say that won't work? So the Gemara says, Elalav b'kohen. Rather, it's talking about a kohen, meaning the Reb Chia is referring to the case of the kohen being Tameh Tumas Mates. And therefore, Ushma Mina, Hutra like Tumas HaTahim. So we see that when Reb Chia says that the Tumas Mace is Hutra by Tumas HaTahim, it's referring to a kohen becoming Tameh. Because we already said that when it comes to the Bailim, Nazir doesn't work. And according to one Manda Amar Carbon Pesach, it doesn't affect it. So therefore, we're talking about the kohen being Tameh. If we're talking about the kohen being Tameh, so the tzitz will help only if the kohen becomes Tameh through Tumas Mace. If the kohen becomes Tameh through something else, then it will not help. Any questions up until now, or are we good? I know that's a very challenging Gemara, but Lamaisa, at the end of the day, we come out over here. The Gemara's saying, again, the kasha of Rami Bar Chama was, will the tzitz help a kohen that's tameh? So, end of the day, what we did, we came up with a scenario that, according to Reb Chia, the tzitz will help if a kohen becomes tameh. If a kohen becomes tameh, tumas mates, the tzitz will help. That is what the Gemara has at this point. Okay? Good. So Rabbi Yosef is now going to throw that away. Of course, why not? So Rabbi Yosef says, no, we're not talking about a Kohen. Rami Bar Chama, you thought you had an answer. You thought you had the teretz to your kasha of, will the tzitz help by a Kohen? No. You know why? Because Reb Chia is still talking about the Bailim, but we're excluding another type of Tumah. Again, Tumas Meis, Hutra, very good. Tumas Sheretz was the problem. And we came up with a case that by Tumas Sheretz, it doesn't affect the Karban Pesach. So the Gemara is bringing in a new case called Tumas Ziva. Now, again, obviously, it requires just a little bit of a hakdama, and once we have the hakdama, the Gemara should flow pretty well. So the different the different tumas guf, we have keri, which a person sees keri, he goes to the mikveh during the day, and at night he is tahar with harav shemesh. Then we have ziva. Ziva is another type of flow from a man's body. If it's 2 days, he becomes a zav. Right? He has this flow 2 days in a row. He is a zav. He's tameh for 7 days, and he needs shiva nikiyim. So we'll discuss that in a minute, what we're talking about. And then you have nida. And again, I know that you've gone through this many times, but just to for clarity's sake, midaraisa, we're not talking about the nida that we are naye. The nida is the 7-11, right? So you have the 7 days, the first 7 days, that if she sees dam in those 7 days, she has to she needs a new 7 days. But if she sees dam during those 11 days, so she sees 1 day or 2 days, if she sees 1 day or 2 days, she's called a shemeres yain keneged yain. And a shemeres yain keneged yain means that you wait 1 day, hopefully everything is good, and then you continue. If you see 3 days, she becomes a zava gedayla, and then she requires shiva nikiyim. Okay? So, what we're going to be talking about is a very interesting case. We're going to be talking about the case is where on the last day of their counting, so for example, you have a zav on their last day. So the last day happens to be Erev Pesach. So they didn't see anything. They've been clean, and they shech the Karban Pesach in the morning. Then they end up having a ziva later on in the day. So what's the din? What does the ziva after the Karban Pesach do? Does that knock off what you did, or does that not knock off what you did? And that's what the Gemara is going to discuss. And this is again, like I said, it's a little bit complicated, but we will get through it in Mirza Hashem. So the Gemara says like this: Amar Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says, "Lo, really, we're not talking about that the tzitz is helping out for a kohen that became tamei. Rather, la'ilam bid bailim. We're talking about where the Baal, the owner of the Karban, became tamei. Ubit Pesach, and we're referring to a Karban Pesach. Okay, so referring to the Baal, and we're referring to the Karban Pesach. Okay, then what Tumah are we excluding? We have to exclude a Tumah. Reb Chia said that the tzitz is miratza only for Tumas Meis of Tahom. Which Tumah is he excluding? So ulemavute Tumas Hatahom de Ziva. And it comes to exclude the Tumas Hatahom of a Zav. Okay, again, the way you have Tumas Hatahom of Zav is that you didn't know, you had no way of knowing that you were a Zav, which is the case that we're discussing, which is that he had no way to know that later on in the day he would see a ziva, a flow would come from his body later on in the day. On day 7, Erev Pesach, he had no idea that later on in the day he would become a zav. That is a unique way, a unique type of tumas hatahim. Again, the idea of tumas hatahim is that I didn't know that there was tuma here. Ziva, not knowing that later on you're going to have this ziva, that's also a type of tumas hatahim. So the Gemara says, so therefore, what are we excluding? We're saying that the tzitz is not miratzah for tumas hatahim of ziva, only miratzah for tumas mace for tumas mace of tahim, not tumas ziva. Frak the Gemara, is that really true? The tumas tahim de ziva loy miratzah is the tumas tahim of a zav, not miratzah. And again, we're going to bring the case of a shemeres yom keneged yom, meaning on that last day was Erev Pesach, shechted the carbon, and only later on in the day they were raw, they saw. So similar case to the zav. But Tanya, we learn in a brayser, Rabbi Yosi Omer. Rabbi Yosi says, shemeres yom keneged yom. Again, like we said, a woman who's a nida in her 11 days sees dam. She watches a day to see if she's clean for that day. Sheshachtu, v'zarku aleha. They shechted and then they did zrika. B'sheni shala, on the day of on her second day, which is referring to her shemeres yom, the day that she's watching. The achar kach rasa, and later on, the achar kach rasa, and later on she saw dam. Eina oicheles, she's not able to eat. Upitura milasais pesach sheni, and she's pater from doing pesach sheni. So let's think about it for a second. Why is she pater from pesach sheni? Must be my taima lad mishum de miratzah tzitz. The only way that you're pater from pesach sheni is if pesach rishon you were good. She was tumas ziva. Elamai must be that the tzitz was miratzah on the tumas ziva. From the fact that she doesn't have to do pesach sheni, we see that tzitz is miratzah. So how can you say that the tzitz does not help for tumas ziva? That's the kasha. So the Gemara answers, Amri, and it's a beautiful pshat. Amri, look. Mishum de kasava Rabbi Yosi mikanu lahaba hi metama. Rabbi Yosi says something beautiful. Rabbi Yosi says, let's just take the 7 days for example. On the seventh day, in the morning, Erev Pesach, they shech the carbon. What does mikanu lahaba mean? So Rashi explains that it says Rabbi Yosi holds of miktzas hayom kekulai, meaning that the morning of day 7, she's tar, that's your 7 days, and she's done. The zav is done, and she's good. And the tumah is only mikanu lahaba, only later on. So she sees at night, that had no effect, that is not connected to the previous 7 days. That we don't look at it as if she's soiser her days. Why? Because since miktzas hayom kekulai, that morning of day 7, her counting is done, and therefore, it's not that the tzitz was miratzah, is that she was not tameh anymore. She wasn't tameh anymore that morning. She woke up that morning, she's completely tahar, and therefore there's no raya that the tzitz is miratzah. We're just showing that according to Rabbi Yosi, this is not a case of tumah, and she's good. Okay. Tanya, any questions? Okay, good. But Tanya, we learn in a brisa. Rabbi Yosi Omer. Rabbi Yosi says, and again, we're going to have a similar case. We're going to ask a question. Again, the idea right now is that Rabbi Yosi holds that miktzas hayom kekuloi, the last day is if you're done, and only mikanu haba, only from now we restart a new tumah. Frak the Gemara about Tanya, we learn in a brisa. Rabbi Yosi Omer, zav bal shtei re'iyos, a zav who saw twice, sheshachtu v'zarku alav b'shvi shalai. So again, he has to count 7 days. He has to count 7 days. And Erev Pesach was on his 7th day. V'achar kach ra. And then he saw later on in the day. V'chein. And similarly, shemeres yom keneged yom. Again, like we saw a woman who was in her 11 days and saw either one or twice, 1 day or 2 days. She has to be a shemeres yom. So on that day, she shechted and v'achar kach rasa. Harei elu mitamin mishkav umoshav limafreya uptur milasas pesach sheni. So Rabbi Yossi says something that really is seiser itself. He says, number one, you're pater pesach sheni, which again seems to be it's miratza, but then he says that you're tamei limafreya, right? He says you're tamei limafreya. So if 1 second. Good. So if you're tamei lemafreya, then how does it work? How does it work? Again, we said we're showing that you were tamei before. So if you're tamei before, obviously the tzitz is miratza. If you're saying lemafreya, that means that you were tamei even by the time when you shechted the carbon pesach, and yet your pater from pesach sheni must be that the tzitz was miratza. Not like what we just said. We just said that according to Rabbi Yossi, it was miktzas hayom kekulo, the tumah's done, and the carbon pesach is a classic carbon pesach, a regular carbon pesach. Here Rabbi Yossi seems to say that you're tamei lemafreya, that you're tamei by the shas hakrab, by the shas shechting, the shas zrika, and the only way that it would work is through the tzitz helping out. So how does Rabbi Yossi say that? So the Gemara answers, Amri, Maila Mafreya Midrabanan. No, it's only Tuma Drabanan. Really, Rabbi Yossi says it's Mikanal Abba. Midarai says Mikanal Abba, and Miktas Hayom Kekulo, the Ziva is over. Midrabanan, we say that we're Choishesh on a Tuma Lamafreya, but that has no bearings in what we are talking about. Really, what happens is, according to Rabbi Yossi, on the morning of day 7, Miktzas hayom kekulo, the tumah is over, and when he shechts and does zrika, the carbon pesach, he's shechting and doing zrika, the carbon pesach, like a tahar dikamensh. Good. So now we're just going to have a conversation that Reb Oishia is going to show that that he holds tumah lemafreya. V'af Reb Oishia savar mitame lemafreya midirabanan. Reb Oishia also says that it's mitame lemafreya only midirabanan, meaning that midaraisa, you're tahar in the morning. Midarabanan, we're machmer. So the Tanya, Reb Oishia Omer, aval zav shera b'shvi shalai, a zav that sees on its 7th day, soiser as shalafanav, knocks off the days earlier and has to restart. V'amlei Rabbi Yochanan said to Reb Oishia, lo yister ela yaimai, only 1 day should be knocked off. Okay, but frak the Gemara, mimanav shach. Either way you look at it, if you're going to say it goes all the way back, then it should knock off every day. If you're going to say the tumah only goes from here on in, then yomo namilanista, then it shouldn't affect 1 day. Again, Rabbi Oishia says if he becomes tameh, you get rid of all the days, you restart. Rabbi Yochanan says 1 day is knocked off. But that's neither here nor there. It either knocks it all off or it knocks none off. So what are we saying? Ella ema, rather say lo yistav lo yema. Yeah, you don't knock off anything. So Rabbi Yochanan is saying you don't knock off anything. Amalei Rabbi Yossi kai kavasech. So it says Rabbi Yossi is going like you, meaning that it would be lemafreya tamei. Rabbi Yossi amar mitame mishkav umoshav lemafreya. He says you're tamei lemafreya, so how does he now say that it's not? So it must be that it's only a tuma dirabana. Okay. Now what the Gemara, so we proved a number of things. We proved that the tumas ziva is not necessarily miratza b'tzitz because we hold like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says miktzas hayom kekulo, that morning you become tahar, and therefore you don't even have to deal with the tzitz. We also showed that he holds lemafreya, it's tameh only midrabanan. Midaraisa, you're good, but midrabanan, it is tameh. So now we want to ask a question. Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi, hashta da'amar mikan laba hu mitame. Now that he says mikan lahaba, so it can't be, again, let's get back to Reb Chia, back to Amud Beis. Reb Chia said that with that tumas hatahaim is only miratze by tamei mace. So what is that excluding? It can't exclude tumas ziva anymore, according to Rabbi Yossi. So that's what the Gemara is asking. According to Rabbi Yossi, that says mikana lahaba. So what is Reb Chia coming to exclude? When Reb Chia says that they're only miratze tumas hatahom by tamei mace, so what is it not miratze on? We can't be talking about ziva, so we have two options, as the Gemara is going to say. Option number one is going to be the case of the Kohen, right? If the Kohen becomes tamei, that's option number one. And option number two is sheretz, according to the one who says that a carbon pesach cannot be brought if you're tamei sheretz. Okay, so those are the two options that we're going to deal with, and that's what the Gemara is going to say. So again, Rabbi Yossi, according to Rabbi Yossi, now that Rabbi Yossi told us that the Tumah only starts Mikan Laba, Pirish, a mixed Yom Kikulo, and therefore Tumah Ziva is not, we can't be talking about that. So what is the word that Reb Chia said that Meis Bilvad is coming to exclude? Nifshod Mina, we can learn from here, we can answer from here, Debik Kayhain. We're talking about a kohen, right? So we're saying, we are now helping Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama's first kasha, the whole sugya. Boy, Rami Bar Chama, if a kohen becomes tamei, does tumas hatahaim help? So we're just saying that according to this, tumas hatahaim will help for a kohen if it's tumas mace, but we'll exclude a different tumah by a kohen. But the point is that we've answered that a kohen could be miratze betumas hatahaim. So the Gemara, and that would help the answer, the kasha of Rami Bar Chama, and that's why the lashon of nifsheit mina, right? The Gemara is trying to answer the baya, the kasha of Rami Bar Chama. So the Gemara says no, la'olam b'bailin. No, we haven't answered. We're really talking about the owner. U'b'pesach, and we're talking about the Pesach, and like we said earlier, the kasabar ein sheich l'mizork al tamei sheretz. We held that if someone becomes tamei sheretz, then the carbon pesach doesn't work. Remember, we saw there's a machlekes. So this shita that the tumas sheretz will affect the bailim over here. V'itzrich lemute, you have to exclude it to say that the tzitz will not help someone who became tamei through tumas sheretz. Okay, and Hadran alach, the hard part of today's daf. Okay, now we're going to be talking about a very good question. So Rabbi Yossi said, and a very interesting terutzim. Rabbi Yossi said, "Miktas hayom kekulo," meaning, like we said, on the seventh day, as soon as it hits the day, you're done. You're tahar and you're good. How do you ever have a zava gedayla according to Rabbi Yossi? According to Rabbi Yossi, you need 3 days in a row, right? So if on the next day, when you wake up in the morning, you didn't see anything, so you are now tahar. And miktas hayom kekula shows that it's as if the full day was tahar. So how do you ever have a zava gedayla according to Rabbi Yossi? It's a beautiful kasha. So listen, Zak the Gemara. El Rabbi Yossi zava gemura heichim mishkachasla. So how do you ever have a zava gemura, a zava gedayla, 3 days of? So the Gemara says, b'shoifas. Okay, you're an uninterrupted flow of ziva for 3 days. Okay, weiter. So iba yasema, another teretz, would be kigoin shirasa kol shnei bein hashmashes. So you have the case where here, the case is where you have two bein hashmashes. So let's say it's Friday Shabbos and Shabbos Sunday. You see a person sees a ziva starting right at the end of Friday going into Shabbos, and then right at the end of Shabbos going into Friday. How does that work? Shabbos morning, he wakes up and he doesn't see anything. Why don't I say miktas hayom kekulo? The teretz is that you don't say miktas hayom kekulo if at the beginning of that day you were tamei. Since at bein hashmashes, the ziva went straight from Friday to Shabbos, then at the onset of Shabbos, he was tamei. And therefore, you can't say mixam kekulai. So I have Shabbos Sunday, and now, I have Friday Shabbos, and now if I have Bein Hashmashos of Shabbos Sunday, the same thing happens. And therefore, that's how I can have 3 days of Zav according to Rabbi Yossi. Good. Okay.
Rabbi, but isn't the halacha that by Zav, if his flow lasts for the time it takes to be boidik in between, it counts as 2?
I don't know. I will be. It could be. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. I happen to be learning Zavim now, but I think that's right. The halacha. So then that if it's shaypas,
it could be right. Again, it seems to be the way Rashi is saying it is that if there's never a stop, then what you might be saying is that if it's a certain amount of time, then you can count it as 2. But if it's never stops, then maybe not. It could be that's the chil. It could be that's what Rashi is saying. Rashi has a lashon of shloi have a minyana called shloi kol shleisha ritzufin. It's mamish ritzufin, one all together 3 at a time. It could be. I'm not sure. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe it's not. But it could be. Okay. By Rabbi Yosef. So now Rabbi Yosef is going to ask a kasha. Kain. Now this next kasha. We're assuming that a kain is tamei that tzitz helps. Again, we're assuming that side of Rami Bar Chama's kasha. Again, Rami Bar Chama asks if a kain becomes tamei that tzitz help. This next question is on the assumption that it does help. So if it helps by a carbon Pesach, we're going to now try to say maybe it'll help by another carbon. So Zok the Gemara one more time. By Rab Yosef kain amaratza betamid, a kain who is bringing the carbon tamid hutra like tumas hatahaim oilai. Does the tumas hatahaim Does the tzitz help for tumas hatahaim by a carbon tamid or not? Imtim tzalemer kain amaratza b'carbon sayin of a nazir and a pesach hutraloi tumas hatahaim that it does help. Again that a kain who became tamid, the tzitz will help him. Kain amaratza b'tamid mai. So what about by a tamid? Mi amrina do we say gemiri tumas hatahaim b'pesach b'tamid loy gemir? We only learn this halacha by a carbon pesach, but not by a carbon tamid. Or we learn a tam for Pesach. That's the kasha. Do we extend the miratz of the tzitz of the kayin being tameh to the carbon tamid, or is it only a carbon Pesach dikadin? So Amar Rabba says kal v'chaymer. We have a kal v'chaymer. Uma b'makom. This is a very interesting kal v'chaymer, but it's not for now. Amar Rabba says kal v'chaymer. By a Nazir and Pesach, where Tuma Yedua is not Hutra, okay? Hutra le Tumas Hataim. We do Mater Tumas Hataim. Again, by Pesach, we say that Tumas Hataim is Mater. Makom Shehutra le Tuma Yedua, by a carbon Sibor, where we say Tuma Hutra bit Sibor, Einoi Din. Of course, tumas hataim will be matter. Now, there's a question. Yes, we see that carbon Pesach, we do say tumah hutra b'tzibor. This kal v'chomer, it's a problem. Okay, it's a shtickle beyond the purview of this shir, but it's a problem. So anyone who had that question, that's a question. The Rishonim asked that kasha. The kal v'chomer is an issue; it has to be dealt with. Either way, but we're going to take that as face value right now. Rabbah says. Pesach, which is not hutra by Tuma Yedua, is hutra by Tumas Hatahaim, carbon Sibur, i.e. carbon Tamid, which is hutra Tuma Yedua. Of course, it should be hutra by Tumas Hatahaim, and therefore we would say that a kain that became Tameh by Tumas Hatahaim, the tzitz will be mirata. So the Gemara says, Amri. Hold on a second. Can you make a kal v'chomer from halacha l'Moshe Sinai? Now we're going to bring a raya that you can't from a different case, from a different kal v'chomer, from dam. We're not going to go into the kal v'chomer. All we're taking out of this case is that you can't make a kal v'chomer from a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. We are not going to explain what that kal v'chomer is or what we are talking about specifically in that sugya in Nazir. We're just going to bring out that you cannot make a kal v'chomer from a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. But Tanya, we learn in a brisa. Amalei Rebbe Eliezer. Akiva, and this is Rabbi Akiva's Rebbe, so he's calling him Akiva. Akiva, etzem kisayra halacha. Etzem kisayra is a halacha l'mosh misinai that's the shear. Revius dam kal v'chaymer. They ain't done in kal v'chomer me'halacha. Seems to be Rabbi Akiva wanted to make kal v'chomer, and Rabbi Lazar said you can't. But what do we see here? You can't make a kal v'chomer from halacha l'mosh misinai. So how is it possible now that we're going to make this kal v'chomer by tamid from the halacha l'mosh misinai? Along my Rabba, Yolif Mayada mi Pesach, this Gezer Shava Mayada, which we've used before, we are going to connect it to Pesach. That just like Tahom by Pesach is Miratza, so too the Tahom by Tamid is going to be Miratza. Okay. Where do we know? What is the source for Tumas HaTahim? Now again, Rashi points out that this kasha doesn't really make sense either, because we know that it's a halacha l'mosh misinai. So how are you asking what's the makar? So Rashi very interestingly says that this shaila was asked before Rabbi Yosef said it's halacha l'mosh misinai. Interesting point. And therefore, we're going to ask, and then we're going to come out that's halacha l'mosh misinai. So that's the Gemara says like this. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Kav, Chiyamas Meis Olav, if a mace dies on him, b'mechuveres Olav, it's clear to him. Okay. Ashkechan Nazir. So we find by a Nazir. Osa Pesach Minol. It's a case by Nazir. How do you know someone who does a carbon Pesach that there's the Tumas HaTahim is Miratza? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kra b'derech rechoka lachem b'mechuveres lachem. When is it a problem? Only if lachem they know about it. When it's clear to them. If it's not clear, then it's not a problem. Rav Shimon Lakish Amar Kederech, like the road. Ma derech begoloi, af tumanami begoloi. Again, open. So only open tuma is going to be a problem, but tumas hatahom is not going to be a problem. Practically Gemara Meisvei, Ezehu tumas hatahim. What's considered tumas hatahim? Kol shalei hikar ba echad b'seif ha'olam. Echad. No one knows about it. B'seif ha'olam. Sorry, one more time. Nobody knows about it. If someone does know about it, aims at Tumas Hatam. This is not Tumas Hatam. So what this is going to do, that means that no one can know about it. So the Rebbe Eliezer, so we're going to ask a question on all those three sources. The Rebbe Eliezer Damar Mechuveres Alav Ad Yadahu, meaning he has to be the one that knows about it, which implies that other people can know about it. Rabbi Yochanan Damar Lachem, the Mechuveres Lachem, they have to know about it, which implies other people could know about it. If they don't know about it, it's a Tumas HaTahom, which is not what we're talking about. Tumas HaTahom again means that no one can know about it. Ad Yodi Beitrei, and until those two know about it. Rabbi Shimon Lakish Damar Kederech, Ad Yodi Kulei Alma, until everyone knows. So again, but the point is that in these cases, it would leave open the possibility for people to know about it and still be considered Tumas HaTahom, but that's a problem. So you say, Ella Tumas HaTahim Hilchasa Gemirila, it's Halacha L'Moshe Misinai, Ukra Smachta Ba'alma, and these psukim are just Nasmachta, but at the end of the day, how do you know Tumas HaTahim is Miratza? That is through Halacha L'Moshe Misinai. Okay. Good. Weiter. Amar bar Rav Ashi. When does this help? That's only if you found out after Zrika. Dechi is Darik Dam, Shaper is Darik. When he sprinkled the dam, so he did it, or he knew he was good, and then he found it afterwards. But if he knew about it before the Zrika, again, he shafted it, he found out, and then before the Zrika, he found out that he was Tamei Tumas HaTahim. So the tzitz is not miratza. Okay. So again, at this point, the Gemara says after Zrika, tzitz is not miratza. Okay. Sorry. Before Zrika, tzitz is not miratza. Okay. So the Gemara says, Meis ve'frak the Gemara shaila. Hamaitze meis mushkav l'rachbay shel derech. If someone ends up finding that a dead body is found across the entire width of the road. Okay. L'truma tameh, l'nazir v'osa pesach tar. For truma, he's going to be tameh. For nazir and pesach, he is tar. Now, very interesting. The Gemara is going to make a very beautiful diak. When it uses the lashon, the Tosefta is using the lashon of tahar and tameh. Tahar and tameh are meaning that you're good, meaning mikana lahaba, meaning it's tahar and it is tameh. If I wanted to say you're no good, I would have said kosher or pasul. What you did was kosher, what you did was pasul. If I say tahar or tameh, that's talking about in the future. It's tahar in the future, or it's tameh in the future. So if I'm saying that for the Korban Pesach, it's tahar, that means that even before Zrika, you're good. Which means that even if I found out before Zrika, the Tumas HaTahom would be Miratze, it's tahar. If I say kosher, that means that in the past. Tahar means in the future. As the Gemara says, B'chol tameh v'tar lehabahu. It's coming to say in the future you're good. So Nazir and Osa Pesach, it's good for the future. Therefore, you would be able to, even if you found out before Zrika, you would be able to do the Zrika. Rather change it around and say it like this. Don't say that only if he found out after Zrika who the miratza, then it works. But if he found out before Zrika, it wouldn't work. Even if he found out before Zrika, it would work. Okay, so let's talk about the case of the mace. So again, we just came out that again, even if I find out before Zrika, Tumas HaTahom, the tzitz will help. And after you shechted it, before the Zrika, you found out that you were Tameh Tumas HaTahom, you're still allowed to do the Zrika and you're okay. Good. Now we're going to talk about the case of the practical case of Tumas HaTahom, and this is the easy part of the daf. Gufa. Hamaitzi mace mushkov l'rachvei shel derech. If a person finds a dead body, again, finds out that there was a dead body that was across the road. And the reason why it says across the road, because it would be impossible for you to cross over that road without being mal al mace, right? Without walking over this dead body, and therefore you would be tameh. So the truma tameh, the nazar was a pesach tahar. That's what we said. For truma, some were more machmir by truma, but for nazar and someone who's making the pesach, he's going to be tar. So bamed devarim amurim. So when are we saying that it's tameh? She'ein le'makom lavar. You have no other way to pass, right? Picture two walls, a dead body here, and the only way to pass through is by passing over this dead body, and therefore you must have become tameh. But aval yesh makom lavar. But if there is a place, if you could avoid it, you're tahar. Now Rashi explains, why would I be tahar? Because this falls under the category of safek tuma bershus harabim, sfeiko tahar. If there's a safek, if you have a safek, whether you became tameh. If you're in reshus harabim, we say you're tahar. If you're in reshus hayachid, we say you're tameh. We learned that out of Sota. But here we have a suffix tumah b'rishus harabim. Why is there a suffix? Because it was possible that I wouldn't have stepped over this mace. So since there's a suffix tumah b'rishus harabim, we say sfeiko tahar. That's why the truma is going to be tahar. But what do we say? Bamed devarim amurim shematzu shalem. When are we going to say that it's tameh? That's only if you found it complete. Aval mishubar umefurak. But if you find it broken up, then tahar, it's going to be tahar. Why? Shema ben aprakim avar. Maybe he was able to walk around and through the different part of the body parts. Ubikever, but if you pass over the kever, afil mishum rever tameh. Why? Once it's in the kever, even if it's broken up, it doesn't make a difference. The kever itself makes it one unit, and as long as you pass over a kever, it doesn't make a difference. If you technically did not pass over a body part, you're still going to be tameh. Okay? So bamed devarim amurim. When is it possible to say that it would be tahar b'mahalech b'raglo? That's if you're just walking. So if you're walking, you have the ability to tiptoe around different parts to technically have the ability to not walk over the body part. Avotan, if he's carrying something heavy, or rochav, or he's riding, tameh, he's going to be tameh. Why? If he's walking, it's possible that he won't touch or won't walk over it because he could avoid it. Avotan, if he's carrying some rochav or he's riding, it's impossible he's not, because Rashi says again, when you're carrying something, you're not really in control of your steps. You're just trying to make sure that you're holding this load. So you're walking in whichever way you can keep your balance. And that's why we can't assume that you missed anyway, because we don't know where his feet were. So the Gemara says, okay, When is this? It's tahar. When is this possibility of being tahar? That's only tumas hatahim. There's a kula by tumas hatahim. But if there's actual tumah there, then you're tameh. So now we end off ve'ezo hi tumas hatahim. What is this tumas hatahim? Kol shel hikr ba'echa b'seif ha'olam, when no one knew that tumah was there. Aval hikr ba'echa b'seif ha'olam, if someone knew that it was there, ein zeh tumas hatahim. That's not called tumas hatahim. So where are we finding this body? Matzu tamun b'tavni, found it in straw, ba'afar, in sand, b'tzreiris, among pebbles. Harei zeh tumas hatahim. That is considered tumas hatahim. But b'mayim, in water, ba'afela, if it's dark, b'nikike slime, in the cracks of rocks. Ein zeh tumas hatahim. That's not called tumas hatahim. And then this is coming back to Reb Chia's statement, which we started really today with, that says, we only say tumas hatam lames, and again we have three possibilities of exclusions from that line. Either it's referring to, you're right, the bilam is a problem, or we're talking about a kohen that became tameh. Number two is we're talking about where tumas mace is not a problem, but tumas sheretz, according to the one who says that carbon pesach will be affected by tumas sheretz. Or the third possibility was tumas ziva, not according to Reb Yossi. Okay?
Shkoyach, thank you.
That was beautiful. Shkoyach.
All right.
Excellent.
See you tomorrow, Mitzvah.
Yes, Shkoyach, thank you very much.
Thank you.